3 months ago, I picked up this 237,000 mile 2007 Lexus LS460L. I've owned it for 3 months now. I've put quite a few miles on it. Today we're gonna do a full inspection on the car and figure out everything that is wrong with my 240,000 mile Lexus LS460 that I bought for only $5 grand. Today we're gonna throw my Lexus LS460 up on the lift, put it up in the air, and we are going to check out everything. We're gonna look at the entire underside of this vehicle that has been through 17 winters here in the state of Minnesota. We're gonna shake it down, we're gonna look under the hood, we're gonna see what's leaking. We are going to see every single thing that does not work on this 240,000 mile Lexus.
Hello everyone and welcome to Performance on Wheels. My name is Todd. My son Austin and I, we make all sorts of videos on all sorts of different cars. Today's video is a little bit special. And why is it special? This is one of the last videos we're going to be shooting in what has been our home for the past 9 years. There's a sold sign out front, but there's a story behind this. So make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, because not only are we gonna have additional car content as we move forward, we're also going to be creating like the ultimate man cave, the man garage, the new Performance on Wheels studio. Austin, we've been moving furniture up to the yard, but we had to take a break to shoot some good content on the LS460 here. And I just have to admit here, there's just something truly special about looking back at cars that maybe we didn't know existed or weren't important to us at the time, or quite honestly couldn't afford. And now you have these amazing cars that are $5, $10, $15, $20,000. And I think it's absolutely just a lot of fun to look back at them and not only see how they're holding up like we're going to do in today's video, but also just appreciating like the progression of the automotive industry.
It has been truly fantastic that I have had the opportunity to daily drive this car the last few months. Like my dad mentioned, like there's no way I could have afforded this car back in 2007. There's no way the majority of the population could have afforded this car back in 2007. This was a very expensive car, and as the years have gone on, they have continued to depreciate, and it truly is one of the most appealing cars in the market right now when it comes to overall reliability and honestly features and options. Like this 2007 Lexus has just as many features, if not more features, than a lot of modern $30,000 plus cars do. So today we're gonna go under this thing. We're gonna see how it's holding up with a 240,000 mile example, like I mentioned earlier. So without further ado, let's go ahead and lift this thing in the air. Let's do a full underside inspection of this Lexus. And then after that, I'm gonna tell you and show you all of the issues that I personally have with my Lexus. We're gonna see if we can easily fix them here in the garage today, how easy this thing is to ultimately work on. But without wasting any more of your time, let's get this thing up in the air and see what it's all about. I know I've already mentioned this a couple of times, but just to reiterate this, guys, like this is kind of mind-boggling to me before I start like diving deep and showing you everything on the underside of this car. This is a 240,000 mile Lexus LS460L, okay? It has been through Minnesota winters. It was purchased in this state, in Minnesota, 17 winters. And you can't tell me this guy didn't drive it in winter with 240,000 miles on it. There's no rust on the underside of this car. Like, there is zero rust on the underside of this car. We see a very small amount of surface rust here and there. I just don't understand how there's this rust starting on the body in this one small spot, but this looks like a rust-free vehicle looking on the underside of this. I would not ever guess this was a Minnesota car, and that is really saying something up to the build quality on it. And now a quick word from today's sponsor. This is the Highboy Max Pro electric scooter with a top speed of 22 miles an hour, featuring both drum and regenerative braking.
Come here and check out this cool tech. We've got a digital speedometer. We have 3 different drive modes. We have cruise control, we have a headlight, we have some sweet lights down below, and also we have a bell. Being car enthusiasts, we absolutely love hitting the racetrack. And one thing that has always been very enjoyable at the racetrack is having an e-bike. I cannot tell you how excited I am to have the Highboy scooter out at the racetrack this year, so we can cover all 4 miles of Road America, an amazing road course located in Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin. This Highboy is going to be able to manage all the terrain, both on and off-road, and be able to get us to all the different fun locations.
And using our discount code PWMAXPRO, you can get an additional 5% off of the currently on sale $659 Highboy Pro Max. Be sure to check out the link down in the description below.
Like every luxury car, the LS460L, well, let's just back up a second, because there's been very few cars that have been on this 4-post lift that take up the entire lift, and the LS460L is one of those cars. But anyways, back to what I was saying, there's covers everywhere, and a lot of that is because it's such a luxurious ride, obviously, and everything is still intact on this 2007 that we're sharing with you guys. And when we talk about the suspension, it's obviously a multi-link suspension, just like every luxurious car. This one's a little different as it doesn't have air ride, so that's just one thing to keep in mind when you're talking about a really old high mileage car. We haven't had that maintenance to deal with. But we are seeing some wear on some of the bushings. We'll start getting into some of the specifics. But I ultimately am going to say we're not going to spend all night taking every one of these covers off because I might need a nap.
Now, the only issue that I have right in the rear of my Lexus is this right here. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. As you can see, that bolt has decayed a little bit, and we are no longer holding this shield around this rear muffler, and ultimately that causes this really annoying noise while it's idling. And as you can see right here, that's how we replicate that noise. So to easily fix that, well, quite honestly, there's no easy way to do it with how the muffler's located in here. We'd have to take the muffler off, but I would just put a larger washer around the exterior of that bolt to continue holding up this dust shield, or we can go the easy route and put a zip tie somewhere in it.
And since we're talking about exhaust, let's just go towards the front of the car just for a second, because there's also some really common basic things that we're observing here. Again, exhaust heat shield has been hose clamped on so you don't get that vibration, but it's still intact. Another thing that we're noticing is we're assuming these are more exhaust like dampeners to kind of soak up some of that vibration for that smooth 4.6 liter V8 idle. But anyways, both of those have been rusted away from that flange there.
After taking off about 100 bolts, we took off 3 panels. So there's a steel panel that sits directly under the motor. There is an additional steel panel that sits on the back of the motor, front of the transmission, kind of by the bell housing. And then there is a large carpeted plate that sits over both of those. Very interesting seeing that on the majority of German cars that I personally have worked on. It's typically that one large carpeted panel and that's it. So seeing those 2 additional steel panels as well as the carpeted panel is kind of impressive. The steel panels seem like they're for more bracing, and that carpeted panel is for sound deadening. So it's very interesting seeing all that. But now that we have all of those panels off, we get to see this 4.6 liter in all of its glory, as well as the world's first ever 8-speed transmission. So this is the first time an 8-speed transmission was ever used on a production vehicle. This one works absolutely flawlessly, it shifts flawlessly, and it's very interesting standing up here. You know, we started in the back and we worked our way forward. In the back, ultimately, we didn't see any mechanical issues whatsoever. We did start to see a little bit of wear that's attached to that bushing on the back of the rear drive shaft. There's a little bit of rubber starting to wear. Nothing that concerns me on a vehicle with this many miles on it by any means. It's a wear and tear item. It's going to go out at some point, but it's nothing that I'm going to address right now. All of the suspension in the rear looks flawless. Everything in the back looks totally flawless other than that little exhaust thing I pointed out. Everything in the middle looks new as can be other than the exhaust piece my dad pointed out. And now that we're under the front right up here, I can't believe I'm saying this, ladies and gentlemen. This 240,000 mile Lexus LS does not have a single leak. It doesn't have a single seep. It has no signs of leaking at any point in its life. Every single thing under here is dry as a bone. Every single thing under here doesn't look like a lick of fluid has touched it the last 17 years in its life. Now, I don't know what more I need to say to basically prove to the point that that is some unbelievable reliability. Those are some unbelievable gaskets that the Lexus engineers used, because it reaches temperatures close to negative 30 degrees here in Minnesota and nearing temperatures of high 90s, 100 degrees here in the summer. So this vehicle goes through heat cycles unlike anything else, and the fact that there is not a single leak or even a sign of a leak on any of the metal components in here is truly outstanding. Like, that is amazing. The only modification that we found on this thing is this Milky Way bar.
It is really impressive. Yeah, there's a few little rust spots like Austin mentioned, but it's like beyond clean under here. It is truly, truly impressive knowing the salt that is used here in Minnesota. But it's like not all like peaches and rainbows and unicorns and dolphins jumping, whatever the kids say nowadays. But anyways, there are some flaws that we are seeing, and those flaws are very common, not only on a LS460, but any big boat luxury sedan that has a lot of weight to it. And those flaws that we're seeing are on some of the bushings that are starting to wear out on that multi-link suspension. There's multiple bushings that you can see. That rubber's a little tired and it's not going to hang on forever.
Based on all of the LS460 forums that I joined and looked around online and dug deep in forums online, the Facebook groups, the biggest concern about these cars that scare people away from them, that makes them so unreliable, is, like my dad just mentioned, the upper and lower control arms. This is a big old boat of a car. It's huge, and it was one of the first cars that was this big, this heavy, because like the older LS430s, they were really big cars, but these stepped up their game when it came to weight because of all of the additional tech that's in here. I don't remember the exact measurement, but it's like miles of wiring is ran through the entire vehicle to power all of the crazy electronics that this thing has. And that just goes to show like how much weight is on these control arms that's constantly moving around. So that's why these ultimately fail, is the design that they did with how much weight is on them all the time. Control arms are a maintenance item. I understand that they might go out more commonly than a normal car. I would hope so. It's a big, heavy boat. But we're gonna look at, we're gonna play around and push around on these control arms to see just how bad these bushings are on this particular model. So let's go ahead and raise the front end up. Let's see what those are all about. But I wouldn't let those scare me away from ever purchasing a car. I mean, it's a few bolts and some labor. It shouldn't be that big of a deal to throw some control arms in. Either way, let's jack up the front end and see what's going on. I lifted up the front end just enough so I'm able to shake it down and see if there's anything loose in the front suspension. As I move the wheel side to side here, take a listen. It might be kind of hard to hear, but try to listen close. We do have some side to side play. No up and down play, it stays the same as that side to side. So let's go ahead and check the underside, or the other side, and then we're gonna go ahead and see what it is that's loose. Shaking the wheel down on this side. Stiff as can be, there isn't anything loose at all over here. Let's see what's going on with the other side. My dad's shaking the wheel here, and after examining everything, if I stick my fingers right here, I can feel that looseness. It is coming from the inner tie rod end. That is a significant amount of play, to the point I'm gonna order a part and go ahead and replace it. But ultimately, we don't have any up and down play, which would signify our lower control arms. But let's go ahead and get a pry bar in there and see how much they move. By just sticking the pry bar right here on that lower control arm, I have the availability to kind of move it back and forth. Now, honestly, as I had the pry bar in here, seeing the play, I would not be concerned about the amount of play that is coming out of these control arms. Just so you're aware, this is actually a really great way to easily check your control arms. It's kind of obvious if it looks like an abnormal amount of play. I would recommend control arms on this car simply because of how worn out the bushings look. But ultimately on that side, there wasn't enough play for me to recommend them. On this side, I would say that it's kind of getting to the point where I'd probably go ahead and recommend them for play on this side. On that inner, that one seems to be perfectly fine. So this bushing is pretty worn out. Ultimately, from a visibility standpoint, I would replace the lower control arms on this car, and it needs an inner tie rod end. But that appears to be the only maintenance item that it needs. I also went ahead and just jacked up the back of the car quick to make sure that there isn't anything loose in the rear suspension. Did you see anything on that side?
There is no movement, no play. It feels rock solid.
All right, so the rear end of the suspension is all good on this LS460, and the control arms look fantastic in the rear. The bushings look flawless. It looks like there's absolutely zero wear in the back of this thing at all. I think all in all, that wraps up our underside of the LS460L. I'm very impressed with the underside of this car. I mean, that's no joke. That is a lot of miles. That's more than probably close to double that most cars last on their first motor. And this car is still kicking with everything original in it. So.
Yeah, I actually really enjoy doing stuff like this where you're appreciating the engineering that went into this. It was like 7 years or something like that, engineering that led to the 2007 LS460, right? And I just really enjoy looking at this, and like it's even more fun seeing like how all that engineering paid off over all those years. Like, it's a masterpiece, it really is. Like, so putting the bottom side aside, and we're not talking about that anymore, what other issues are you experiencing with the LS?
Well, let's go ahead and put this thing down on the ground. Let's pop the hood and dive deep into figuring out what other issues this LS might have. Dad is up here finishing up one of my other concerns with this car, and that is the fogged up headlight housings. Now, we literally just fixed this issue in probably 3.5 minutes. Just quick doing a buff on these headlight housings.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
Exactly, super, super easy, but that's going to happen on any older car. One of the main things that really breaks down these headlight housings, especially on a car that's on the more luxurious class, is when they spray windshield wiper fluid on the front of the housings, it really breaks down that protective film, which ultimately causes them to fog over like they did. So this isn't a permanent fix. You're probably gonna have to do this once a year, but just that 3 to 5 minutes of work made this car look significantly more modern. Let's go ahead and pop the hood and check out this 4.6 liter so I can tell you the other issue that I keep running into. Popping the hood of the LS, we have just as many covers under here as we do on the bottom. It's honestly amazing to me how many covers they managed to put under this thing. Every single component is covered in plastic. I will admit it actually does look pretty good, but let's just go ahead and take this engine cover off, which is just so easily rested on here, to look at this 4.6 liter V8. Now, the issue that I keep running into on this thing, believe it or not, is not that it's leaking oil. Like, 0 oil leaks. Like I said, the bottom is clean as can be, and quite honestly, the top of this thing is clean as can be. It's very, very complicated looking, I'm not going to lie. Compared to what I'm kind of used to modifying the LS. This looks way more complicated to work on. I mean, honestly, I could figure it out, but there's a lot of stuff that's going on the top of this 4.6 liter V8. Now, there's 2 common issues with this car. One, there's a kind of a coolant hose that runs under the intake manifold, and it can cause coolant to pool up inside of here. I'm not having that issue. This thing runs and drives flawlessly. I believe, based on talking with the previous owner before I did it, or kind of talking to, it was traded into my work, so kind of talking to the sales guys who worked with the previous owner, he just did this before I purchased it, so that's a huge benefit. But the issue that I'm having, I mean, I can't guarantee that this is the problem, but I believe it's the piston rings. I'm going through oil like nothing else. It is just chowing through oil. It eats oil every time you decide to drive it, and it doesn't hold back. I ended up experiencing this when my oil light came on the other day, to which I topped off 3.5 quarts of oil. Now, this thing does hold almost 10 quarts of oil, so in reality it still had a lot of oil left in it, and I'm glad that the oil light popped on as soon as it did. But that's still a lot of oil, and that was only in the span of about 3,000 miles since the previous oil change. So it's approximately burning 1 quart of oil per mile, and that's quite aggressive. Now, piston rings are a really big job on this, so I am personally not going to address it. I'm just going to top off the oil whenever it needs to be topped off, but I'm going to make sure to check it every time I fill it up with gas. And just to clarify, apparently I said it wrong. It is 1 quart of oil per 1,000 miles, not per mile. That would be absolutely ridiculous. I wouldn't own this car. But it still isn't cheap. Like, it's a lot of oil.
Austin's in the background, putting the cover back on, putting the final touches on buttoning up the LS, so it's good to go for another 200,000 miles. Ultimately, it was really enjoyable checking out this masterpiece behind us, and I will call it a masterpiece, even though it was a $5,000 car. I think it's pretty darn cool. Great, awesome fan of the LS platform, not only in this generation, but I just want to ask you guys, what is your favorite generation? Let's get that conversation going down in the comments below. Thank you so much for tuning into the video today on the LS460L and its 240,000 miles of life.